Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on how Siemens is taking advantage of real-time scheduling using two-tiered tasks. For today's webinar, Rob Fuller and Sanjeev Gupta will be presenting today's webinar. Rob is Director of Engineering at Siemens Gamesa. Sanjeev Gupta will be interviewing Rob for this webinar. Sanjeev is CEO of Realization and was honored with the TOC ICO Lifetime Achievement Award. Rob started his career in engineering, moved to project management, and then continued to engineering management. He has worked for Siemens and Siemens Gamesa for 22 years in the power generation industry. He has been in wind power for the last 1.5 years as engineering manager for the hub and nacelle of their 2.5 megawatt onshore platform. This webinar is being put on by Realization. For those of you who are not familiar with Realization, we provide Concerto, an advanced multi-project management platform for real-time scheduling. Clients that have implemented Concerto and our solutions have seen up to 50% faster project completions and 10 to 30% increased output. We hope you enjoy this conversation. Rob and Sanjeev, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Jennifer. And thank you, Rob, for joining us. Welcome.
Sure, it's my pleasure.
So, Rob, I think to get started, it will be a great idea for the audience to hear something about Siemens Gamesa, about the organization, the products you manufacture, and the projects you do.
Sure. So Siemens Gamesa Renewable Energy is a relatively new company. We've been around for a little over a year, and we're a joint venture formed between Siemens and the former company called Gamesa. We had complementary portfolios, and now together we're one of the larger companies in the industry doing renewable energy. So we've been in the wind power combined between the two companies previous two companies for over 20 years, and we develop products in the renewable energy sector. Our main product is wind turbines, and we do turbines for both onshore and offshore applications. And we also do solar panel integration and energy storage products or projects. So that's a little bit of a background on what we do.
That's very good. Okay. And in terms of a little bit more in terms of the planning and scheduling challenges that you face in your research and development project. So maybe if you can give us a little bit more in-depth information about your research and development projects and what are some of the challenges you face there?
Yeah, so those of you coming from an R&D background probably are familiar with this, but we're doing large R&D projects. So we're developing new wind turbines or significant modifications to wind turbines to support market needs. Those projects typically involve a scoping phase, a phase where we will define market requirements, where we do conceptual design, and then we take those conceptual designs when we're convinced that they meet the market needs, and we'll move them into basic and final design, and then delivering products to customers. So our project cycle times, R&D project cycle times, are about 2 years historically, larger for some where we have a lot of really intense engineering developments, and a little bit shorter on some where we're doing smaller changes. The disciplines that we typically have working on projects will be mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, hydraulics engineers, aero design guys. We've got, of course, manufacturing experts, procurement experts, quality people that are involved. So we have a lot of different disciplines working on our R&D projects. So it's probably similar to what others do.
Thank you. So projects are generally complex. Even if you pick up very run-of-the-mill projects like construction projects, you do have variability and uncertainty.
Yes.
Now, in terms of research and development projects, is there something that makes the research and development projects even more challenging from a management perspective?
Yeah, I mean, they come with their own challenges, of course. So depending on what the market needs are, we will have to innovate and do things that we don't necessarily know how to do. So the projects involve a lot of variability, a lot of concepts that we're pursuing that we're not 100% sure will work out. So there's testing involved and just general complexity. It's the kind of things you would imagine an innovative R&D organization to do.
Okay. And how does it challenge your planning and scheduling activities?
Well, probably in similar ways that it challenges others. So in the intro, you heard that I've been in the engineering portion of our business for quite some time, doing regular productive work as an engineer, some period of time doing project management work, and then in the engineering management cycle. And something that I've seen consistently over my career has been difficulty in effectively planning and executing work. And we see that today as well. And some of the things that we've noticed is a constant push to have shorter development cycles. Of course, getting to market quick is important for all businesses. So we're always pushed to reduce our development cycle times. You can see on the slide here, we're looking to be able to turn around a major R&D developments in a year now, which is roughly a 50% reduction from what we've historically done. And of course, in different industries, the market will shift at different rates. We happen to be in an industry where the market is shifting quite quickly now, and we have to be agile to respond to that. So it all comes down to scheduling and execution.
I know that when you approached us, when we talked the first time, you indicated that the traditional planning and scheduling of projects was not working for you, and you did not feel it could help you meet these challenges that you have put on this slide. Can you talk a little bit more about those challenges?
Sure. And it was a little bit biased. Of course, you know this, Sanjeev. When I came to you guys the first time in my new role, I had of course had experience with you in a previous role in the fossil side of the business, and so I knew that the Concerto software, I knew that the theory of constraints principles were sound and would help us improve. And I moved into a business where we didn't have that learning yet. So we were still using traditional plans. And as many of you know, and if you don't know yet, because you haven't been exposed, one of the things that you will find is that traditional plans and schedules are static. They're cumbersome to create to begin with. They're cumbersome to change and keep active with the work that goes on, especially in an R&D environment. These schedules tend to be pretty rigid. They tend to be full of conservatism so that people are sure that they can meet the end dates. And they tend to sometimes obscure the amount of detail that's involved. So it's difficult for people to see, especially people not involved in executing the work. It's difficult for them to see the details and the interactions between activities. So what we see happening, what I've experienced in the past, is that the plans and schedules that are created with a lot of effort by a lot of really smart people end up not being followed or can't be followed, and to the extent that they are followed, it's probably done in a way where people are resorting just to local optimizations. What's best for me, because this whole system is too complex to really understand what's best for the organization. So that's some of the things we've observed.
We will get into the details of some of your implementation later, but the project that you are doing, I think, is still work in progress. You have completed the first phase of the project, and you are towards the end of it. But can you share, and are there any early indicators of how this process is working for you, and what kind of results might you be able to talk about?
Yeah, I sure can. So we were able to reduce our cycle time by roughly a half on our conceptual design phase. I think deliver with higher quality and less angst in the organization, and actually achieve more than what we typically would achieve in that phase.
Thank you. Yes, so one of the aerospace and defense companies that we had worked with, they used to have this term called traveled work, which was essentially work that should have been finished by a certain phase, but it spilled over into the next phase. And is that what you mean by quality, that the travel work is going down?
Yeah, I think so. It's that. The quality also means for us that we exceeded we met our cost targets, our development cost targets. So what we anticipated the product cost to be at the end of our phase, we were able to meet. And that's something we haven't historically been able to achieve when we had aggressive cost targets, which we had this time. We also were able to achieve more of our documentation deliverables. So we were able to provide the sales organization more details and more deliverables early to allow them to start engaging customers and start developing the market.
Okay, thank you. So now let's move to the core of today's discussion, which is two-tiered tasks.
Yes.
And I'm sure a lot of people are interested in getting down into those details. Can you talk about those two-tiered tasks? And I'm going to bring up the slide that you had provided to us.
Sure. And this is an eye chart, and we don't have to focus on too many of the details here, but I would tell you that I've been involved in the TOC processes and the critical chain concepts for quite some time. I have a colleague who I hope is on the call with us today. I should say ex-colleague because he escaped and retired, Ron Ware, and Ron and I have worked together for quite some time, and Ron became a real student of TOC and of critical chain. And through Ron, I started to learn some of the principles, and I was involved in the implementation that Realization did with our company in a different part of the company, where we saw really good results. I had heard about this two-tier planning. I wasn't really sure what it was, but at the time it didn't really matter because I knew the principles, I knew the concepts, and I'd seen significant improvements by implementing. So I wanted to get Realization in, I wanted to get Concerto running, and I wanted to get an implementation going. We unfortunately had one part of our design development process missing. We had a very robust product development process documented. Siemens has a very robust process, basically includes all the quality milestones, all the commercial milestones. Really, it's a good guideline for developing products, and it's agnostic to the product that you're developing. So the process works equally well with wind turbines as it does gas turbines or cars or blenders. It kind of doesn't matter what you're developing. It's a process within which you can manage your quality while developing. So we had that. That was an available process that was helpful for us. And we had design rules. So within the wind power community, and specifically within our wind turbines, we have quite extensive design rules and procedures that tell us what are our application limits, what are our stress and strain limits, what are our electrical limits on our subsystems, what are the customer requirements for lightning protection and those sort of things. So we have really well documented design rules. What we didn't have well documented was the process of how we design the system. So how do we design a wind turbine? And that basically resided within the heads of our experts. And it wasn't written down anywhere, so it was a little bit opaque. So what we started doing, and it's a bit of a long story, but I think it will elaborate our learning on the two-tier planning process. Before I really understood what two-tier planning was, I asked Ron to come back from retirement for a couple months, and with Sanjeev and the guys, just help us map what we do today, because we didn't have it written down. We had a lot of really smart people that knew what to do and did things generally in the right order, but we didn't have it written down, so it was hard for us to optimize. So we started just by spending some time at the whiteboard with Postit Notes, talking to our experts and saying, we know you guys know what to do, just tell us what you do. And we would capture it, and we would organize it, and we would have lots of Postit Notes on the board. You guys can imagine, many of you have been through this process before. And we would try to consolidate what we thought we understood, put it in a presentation or in a format that they could understand, Visio, for instance. And then we'd come back and sit with them and say, okay, this is what we thought we understood. Is this right? And they would say, yeah, that's what we said, but that's not really what we do. And so we would talk about it some more, and we would map the process again. And we went through this a number of times with different groups of our experts. We had our mechanical experts and our electrical experts and our hydraulics guys. We had some of our chief engineers, because of course we've got some very senior engineers that have been with us doing wind turbine development many times. So we sat with them and we asked, and we basically refined or documented the process that was in people's heads. And each time we did that, we would consolidate like tasks together. And we would say, okay, is this sort of like this? Is this the input to the next task? Are these things iterated together? And just for our own learning, just to try to understand what we did, we collected things that way. And as Ron and some students that we had helping us gathered that data and consolidated it so that we could repeat back to people what we think we understood, we eventually came up, and you can see a portion of our picture on the far left there, those red boxes. And we call them boxes internally. Those boxes ended up being a collection of activities where people agreed that they didn't know exactly in what order they did it, or that order was dependent on exactly the situation. So if we're trying to achieve higher output, we might do one thing. If we're trying to achieve lower cost, if we're trying to achieve higher efficiency, we might do different things during a particular activity in our conceptual design. So they couldn't tell us what we did every time, but we knew that certain interfaces got done together. We knew that certain activities got done together, and we knew that the resources were generally the same resources, the inputs were generally the same, and that the outputs were all either the same or aligned. And so we just collected those tasks together and said, okay, we're not smart enough really right now to know exactly how we do those tasks, but we would all agree they should be done together. And we started referring to them as being done in the room together. So each of our boxes, we said, could be a room where we put all the right people in the room, gave them the freedom to focus on only these activities, gave that team the right set of inputs and a clear set of deliverables. And the teams, when we interviewed them, said, yep, if you give us that, we can go into the room and we can solve those problems. And we generally know which order to do it, but it changes each time. And we said, okay, good, that's good to know. We're on our process, we'll gather that and move ahead. And what we ended up doing was coming up with, not, I think probably Ron, and I'm sure the realization guys knew where we were heading, but it was a learning experience for me. So we gathered that information and we consolidated that information, and basically what came out of the complexity was a tier 1 plan, what we now know as a tier 1 plan, at a high enough level that everybody could intuitively buy into that plan. And so that was a real eye-opener for me, and one of the reasons I'm absolutely convinced that two-tier planning is a huge benefit in R&D projects. So
thank you. Thank you. So what I heard, I'll try to just recap what a few points that you made. One was, wherever there's a lot of uncertainty about the sequence of work or even what work needs to be done, but at a higher level, you still can define what are the inputs and outputs. So
yes.
the inputs and outputs that become a box, and the details go down into tier 2, which might or might not be available on the front end at the time that you're
Correct.
doing.
Correct. Yeah, and one of the things that we noticed was if you try to solve the tier 2 plan, which you see to the right there, which is in this example is rather complex. If you try to solve that with the experts, you get really stuck into the details, and it's difficult to generate buy-in. It's difficult to generate a positive understanding from the organization that they can achieve something different from what they've achieved in the past. So we came in knowing that our market requirements were changing. We had to be more agile, and we simply didn't have 2 years to develop a product like we had historically taken. So there was a general amount of anxiety in the organization about, oh my gosh, we don't know that we can do this in 1 year. In fact, most of our experts are saying we cannot do this in 1 year. You guys are crazy. You're asking us to do something we can't do. And we said, fair enough. Let's just figure out what we can do then. And when we started mapping, if you can avoid getting into the minutia of the tier 2 and at least collect and value that input, because it is very, very valuable input from your experts. If you can collect that and say, okay, we're not smart enough to define all those predecessor successors now, but they're all together in this box. If you were in that room together, could you guys figure it out? Yep, we could. So we just said, good, let's put those in that box, and let's at least agree at a high level that we understand how to develop a wind turbine. And that was our list of tier 1 tasks. So for us, that 1 or 2 year development ended up being about, let's call it 50 tier 1 tasks. And sort of the sanity check for us is that we brought our chief engineer in, who wasn't able to spend a lot of time with us developing the process. And we said, Klaus, we developed this process. We tried to understand how you guys design wind turbines, and this is what we came up with. And in about 10 minutes, I would say, Klaus looked at it and said, yep, that's how we design a wind turbine. You got it right. And so for me, that was a huge sense of relief that we had captured out of everybody's mind something that was simple enough at the tier 1 level that an expert could look at it and quickly say, yeah, that's exactly how we design wind turbines. You guys got it right. And then we could manage the details within each of those tier 1 tasks with those individual experts and work out, the level of complexity you see on the right. But it was really important for buy-in, that we could be better than we historically had been, and buy-in that we knew how to do it.
And I think related to that, what we are hearing Rob tell us is that critical chain project management was a breakthrough in the sense that it allowed you to handle the uncertainty that surrounds task durations. But the uncertainty in projects is not limited to just task durations. There is uncertainty of what work will be done. There is uncertainty about what sequence the work will be done in. And that is where two-tier tasks come and provide the missing link.
Yes.
Okay. So moving on, I know there are lots of questions from the audience. So I think you have already talked a little bit about this, but can you elaborate on the lessons learned? And then I
Sure.
want to open it up to the audience.
Yeah, and one of the, so these are two of the positive lessons learned, and for sure for us, two-tier planning was a transformational step forward. It really was an eye-opener with regards to the clarity with which we could get understanding with our experts, and also the ability to get buy-in. So we basically had a lot of really smart people who knew exactly what they needed to do on a day-to-day basis, but were absolutely convinced that they couldn't do what the market needed us to do. When we got our tier one plans in place, there was a sense of maybe we can eat this whole elephant one bite at a time, and we can sort of see the bites we need to take. And so the anxiety level went down a little bit, and we were able to basically get into work and then focus on what is our next priority and how do we get it done. So the two-tier was very, very helpful. And one of the unfortunate difficult lessons that we learned was I focused too much on execution in the conceptual design phase at the expense of making sure that we had our basic design plans in place. One of our resources misappropriating some resources, well intentioned, but in the end wasn't really where we wanted to put them, was because we didn't provide him with the two-tier planning for our basic design in time to start our basic design. So we basically went through conceptual design so fast and with such focus that I didn't provide the organization the planning necessary to start basic design. So we're recovered now. Took us a week or so to recover, but I can tell you that the exact same thing happened for us again that happened at the beginning. We got to basic design, the anxiety level went up because, oh my gosh, how are we going to do this in the 3 or 4 months that we need before we need to start ordering parts? People got really nervous again, and we said, yep, we understand. Let's just see what we can do. So we'll do the best we can, and let's see what that is. And we sat down and mapped our basic design process much later than I should have, but the learning was again the same. As soon as we got it mapped, literally as soon as we got it mapped and got it on the wall and people started looking at it, the anxiety came back down again. We realized we did have the right number of resources to handle the tasks, and now we're comfortably working again. So so that was a difficult lesson learned, but definitely one we learned again.
Thank you. So I have a set of questions here from Jessica, and I'm going to start with those questions first. How do you, and this is a very common question, how do you determine the duration of tier one tasks when you do not have tier two details yet?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And one of the things I learned is that it's almost not that critical. And I know that sounds crazy. What we did, quite honestly, is we just asked the experts. We said, okay, we haven't mapped all those details yet. We will do that next. And we did do that before we started, but we just asked them for what's your experience. So if you had the right, and we basically asked them exactly this, if you had the right inputs and you had all the resources you need, how long would it take you to do that? And they would tell us based on their experience, and we just said, that's much smarter than anything I have, so that's what we'll use. And we just wrote it down and used it. And then when we got into the details within the tier two level, as you would expect, the experts were approximately right. We were plus or minus 10% or something, their original estimate to what we came up with when we put the plans together. In both cases, we estimated too long, of course, because we estimate based on the way we traditionally perform, not based on focusing and finishing the critical tasks that are necessary to get the project done. So,
okay. And a related question from Jessica is, can you elaborate on the difference between planning and scheduling?
what we did internally is the two names sound too much alike, and too many people bring their own perception of what those words mean. I tried to avoid the distinction, and I agree with you 100%, Sanjeev, on your definition. I just tried to call the scheduling execution management. So I tried to completely separate in the minds of our people planning, because people fall into, well, to me, that's Microsoft project. Let's make 1,500 line items and let's spend 3 months making it. And I know on day 2 of the project it's invalid. That's not planning. It is, but that's not what I want them to think about. And I absolutely don't want them to think about anything like that when we talk about scheduling. So I took to just calling it execution management. So we have a plan, exactly like Sanjeev says. We put it in the GPS, we know where we're going, we know generally which turns we're going to make, but I'm hungry, I want to stop for lunch, and it's time to get some fuel, and there's traffic ahead, so I'm going to take the bypass, and all these things. I just call them execution management. That's the things we're going to do on a day-to-day basis
That
when
might
we're
be sharper.
executing.
Yeah, that might be a sharper distinction: planning versus execution. Thank you.
Yeah.
Then Greg had one more question, which was, how do you migrate the rank and file from skeptics to supporters?
Typically people are skeptical because we as management make them skeptical, because we do things to them routinely that don't generate confidence. And so one of the things we have to do is sort of break that cycle. And I don't mean that necessarily in a negative way. I don't think it's I don't think it was intentional that we do that as managers, but a lot of times, we're forced to meet market requirements. We have only traditional planning available to us because we don't know about these systems yet. And we end up in the phase where we're really multitasking people. We're saying, yep, I know we can't do another one, but we have to because it was sold, so we got to do it. And that generates some mistrust. The other thing that happens is, and all of you that are in larger companies probably have been burdened by this, there's a lot of times what is perceived as the flavor of the month. So we did Six Sigma, we've done Lean, we've done Agile. There's a lot of these things that tend to come through in waves, and there's a lot of very valuable stuff in them. But sometimes they're presented as the only solution, and people get a little skeptical when they see the flavor of the day. And so what we had to do was basically just be very open with people and say, look, there's good principles behind this. We've seen it work in other parts of the Siemens business, and we're working with a very distinguished company in realization that have seen it work with hundreds of other companies. So we're asking you to give us a little faith that there is some substance behind it, and we explain the principles to people, and then we just take the pressure off them and say, look, we don't know how long it's going to take. Tell us what your estimate is, and that's what we'll put down. That's what we plan with, and then we execute much faster. But people don't know that yet, so we just take all of their inputs and we value those, and we write them down, and then we say, let's see what we can do. And we really try to break the cycle of holding people accountable to due dates, which drives a lot of the wrong behaviors. And we simply have to, and it's difficult, but we have to on a daily basis remind ourselves that our goal is just to ask them, how many days do you have left on the task that you're working on, and what can I do to help? Okay. And we don't beat them up on the answer. So it just takes a little while. Yes, change management's important, and all the Cotter and those kind of things are important, and you need to do those things. But in the end, this isn't a very complicated thing. You just have to treat people with respect and tell them, we're in it together, we're going to fail or succeed together, and let's try this.
Okay, thank you. There are a couple of questions from Jack Vinson. Is it surprising to find that project organizations don't have a good understanding of how the work actually flows?
Yeah, it is and it isn't. It's always a little bit surprising when you're in that position, for me. But on the other hand, what can you do? I mean, if you have people that have grown up in the PMI environment and have grown up, learning that this is what you do. You make a plan with all these line items, and it intuitively, when you're starting, it makes sense. I did the same thing when I came out of engineering and started into project management. I didn't know any better, so all I knew to do was follow what was in the industry, and that was sort of traditional planning and PMI stuff. So so that's part of the background, I would say. The other part of the background is that we have very competent project management people who spend a lot of time focused on project management, and they just, quite frankly, don't understand what the engineers do on a day-to-day basis. And sometimes it's hard to get the engineers to tell you what they do on a day-to-day basis because there's a lot of variability in it. So I think both things lead to opportunities for improvement, and this is where a lot of the benefit comes from. It's difficult on big traditional project plans to see the 50 or so items that for us ended up being our tier ones. It was just hard to see those things. But when we consolidated things down the way we were taught to do it by realization, we ended up with something that was just intrinsically right. So the experts could look at it, the new engineers could look at it and say, yeah, that seems right to me. And what we've seen so far, and I'm sure we'll gain more experience, is we've seen the tier ones be very stable. We did not have a written down process for how we develop wind turbines. We had it in people's heads. We put it on paper the first time, and it's been stable since then. We haven't really changed anything at the tier 1 level. On a daily basis, we see changes happening at the tier 2 level, and that's fine.
Very good. Thank you. And then Jessica had one more question, which was, how much percentage did you reduce your tasks by to create your buffer?
There's a technical answer, and then there's the real answer. The technical answer is where's Chris when I need him? I think we reduced the task durations by 70% and then added 30% buffer, accumulated buffer at the end. So the end duration was the same as what all our experts gave us to begin with. So we went in a little conservative. So the total duration of our activity we planned with the original estimates, but we put 30% in buffer. And I'll tell you the other answer is, don't get necessarily overly caught up in it. It almost doesn't matter. It matters because you want to have the buffer signal, and the fever chart is a fantastic tool for giving you a signal. And you can get that signal whether you cut durations to 70% or 60% or 80%, you're going to get a signal. And outside of that, I don't think it's significant.
Do you find more or less multitasking when you use two-tier plans?
Neither. The multitasking is not related to the plans, it's related to the managers executing and daily managing the work. So I hate to be a little flippant about it, but it's not related to your plans so much as it is about the managers valuing the process and the principles and living with them.
What is the typical duration of your tier 1 tasks? And what about the subtasks?
That's a good question, and I would say we don't really have a typical. We just let the work define what the length of the task was. The other part of that question was maybe around the tier 2 tasks, and there we really tried to follow the realization guidance to keep the tier 2 tasks between 1 week and 3 weeks in duration. And I think the guideline behind that, and Sanjeev can tell you more, was if you get much less at the tier 2 level than 1 week, then it's too much detail to manage, and quite honestly, it's probably not valid because those tasks are going to change so much. And if you get much past 3 weeks in duration, people can't honestly tell you how much time they have left. They're going to default to telling you, well, it was the same thing I told you yesterday minus 1 day, because they can't envision there's too much complexity to tell you what it really is going to take. So that guideline's been helpful for us as well to try to keep our tier 2 tasks between the 1 and 3 week duration.
Thanks a lot again. I think we have covered a lot of ground thanks to the excellent questions from the audience. Rob, are there any parting words of wisdom that you would like to say?
I just can't tell you how much I appreciate the development of two-tier planning. It was a real eye-opener. I didn't know it at the time, but it was a real eye-opener. As I was starting my new job here in a new role in a product that I wasn't super familiar with and it wasn't documented anywhere, it was a real value to use that system to bring transparency for all of us.
Okay, thanks a lot again.